I'm good. How are you?
I was.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our City Council meeting, Tuesday, October 30th. We'll call this meeting to order, and we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance invocation by Vice Chairman.
This week we experienced tragedy in our country. There was more senseless violence, and sometimes you reflect back and you ask why. But all we can do is just keep the faith. Will you bow, please? Will you bow, please? Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Matthew 5:4. Let us pray for those families who has lost loved ones, family, friends, and for our fellow citizens to senseless violence in our country this week. Protect us, Lord, by wrapping your loving arms around us. Let us begin to heal as a nation and within ourselves by accepting the fact that while we are different, at the same time, we are of one mind, body, and soul in the Lord. I like to close with the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. Have a motion on the minutes?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Thank you. We have no special presentations this evening, which takes us to the first item on our agenda, which is a public hearing on steep slopes. Just for the audience's information, we will begin this public hearing with a presentation from RPA, and then we will open the floor to those who may want to comment. Anybody who would like to say something on this issue, you will have 3 minutes, and you will be invited to come up to the lectern, give us your name, and then begin speaking. So let's go ahead and get started, John, if you would.
Sure. This will be a short presentation, about 7 minutes. It's based on the same presentation that presented at the committee meeting a couple weeks ago. Again, I'll also expedite things. While we had several speakers last time, I'll be speaking on behalf of the team, but I do want to acknowledge the team that's worked on this. We have our development services staff here with from RPA and our land development team helped us with the permit review and field visits. I appreciate all their work in putting this information together. Okay. So tonight I'm going to try to present and answer again these 5 questions. First, what are Chattanooga's current challenges with development on steep slopes in the floodplain? Two, what are other cities doing about development on steep slopes and floodplains? Thirdly, what do we learn from reviewing the land disturbing permit process? Four, how are we improving enforcement of construction site management? And finally, what options should we be considering for addressing development on steep slopes and floodplains? Our approach to pull this information together, we did several things. We went on site visits, predominantly in the St. Elmo, North Shore, and Mountain Creek Road area. That's where we saw a lot of complaints. And so we visited 8 or 9 sites at least to get a sense of what was happening. We also reviewed past zoning cases. We researched peer cities in the South, and also reviewed our land disturbing permit processes and enforcement as part of this work. And as part of this work, we essentially ended up with what I call 3 buckets, 3 areas that we should be thinking about. One is our zoning codes and policies. Second, our land disturbing permit review process. And thirdly, how we enforce construction site management. So let's start with zoning case review. Currently, we look at basically the past 5 years of cases. About 85% of those cases, again, I'll say that again, 85% had either steep slopes and floodplain or one or the other. So almost every case we look at has this feature. And when we say steep slopes, usually we're referring to about 25 or 30% grade slopes. So why are we seeing more development on these steep slopes than the floodplains? Well, most of the easy land has been built on. What's left is either floodplain or steep slopes. We did an analysis of acre tracts of land that are 5 acres or larger, and roughly 50% of those areas have steep slopes and floodplains. So there's a reason we're seeing more rezoning requests, development requests in these areas, because that's what's left in terms of greenfield development. Looking at prior zoning cases, I'm just going to talk you through a few of these that we've seen in the past that bring this issue to light. This is a case on Mountain Creek Road across from Red Bank Elementary School. Here you see the site. You can see the lines. You see the red lines indicate a hill kind of on both the upper right and to the lower left. Features on this site. The dark areas you see there are steep slopes. The dark brown are 35% grade or steeper. You can see the orange indicate 25% slope. So you can see about roughly a third to half of the site is steep slopes. Well, this is the site plan that was submitted with that project. As you can see, if that was built according to that site plan, it had a significant impact on the steep slopes in terms of grading. When we went through the review process and rezoning, it did end up with a condition that limited, basically required no grading or mass clearing above a topo line at the 70, 180-foot level. So our response, again, reacting to a proposal after reviewing this request, was to come up with that condition to help control how the site was developed. Looking at floodplains, this is a site out in the Cassandra Smith Road area. There are a number of large vacant tracts of land on the west side of Cassandra Smith along with Chickamauga Creek. As you can see here in this slide, a lot of that area has floodplains. That deeper blue you see there shows the floodplain. We received a site plan that did preserve some of the floodplain, but basically developed on about 50%. So going back to this one, you can see most of the site is currently in the floodplain. What got approved was a proposal that developed about 50% of the floodplain and preserved the other 50% through the review process, the rezoning process. Here's another site on the South Broad, adjacent to Chattanooga Creek. They're doing infill residential development. In this situation, the applicant presented a site plan that actually showed all the buildings outside of the floodplain. They actually kept all the impervious surface outside the floodplain, and that was one that you can see the site plan that was developed and is being constructed as we speak. And a condition was developed in that case that no impervious surface would be allowed in the 100-year floodplain. So again, our reaction to the zoning case came up with a condition on the fly to try to protect that resource. Here's another one I'm sure you're all familiar with, a Knickerbocker, a Notting Hill, and North Chattanooga. Site is on an escarpment. Here's the topo lines. You can see the steep slopes that are on this site. Again, looking at the slope analysis, about a lot of it is either 25%, 30, and above. Received this site plan for that request. It was later withdrawn, but again, what would we do if we had a tool, either a policy or ordinance, that would help us understand how this property, what's an appropriate development pattern for this site? This is another case off of Dixon Pike, next to the Publix in Dixon. You can see, again, the site has an escarpment on the back side of the property running up to Big Ridge. You can see, again, the slopes that are on that portion of the site. Received a site plan that did preserve a good bit of that steep slope. In fact, a condition was developed to try to limit any grading or development on that steeper part of the slope as part of that request. So, in looking at those cases, you can see some both good and bad examples of development. I think the concern we have as staff is we're kind of reacting to these requests. It's not consistent. We're making up conditions on the fly. So that's, we think that's not a best practice. It's better to have a consistent set of either policies or standards for how we respond to that kind of development. Secondly is, assuming once it's passed, you still have the challenges in the back end that development services now have to figure out what those conditions mean and how they get applied to a development review project. That creates a challenge on their end, making sure they understand what was the intent behind that condition and how it gets enforced. So those are the challenges we see as staff with the current approach. Looking at the cities that we identified, we looked at Knoxville, Nashville, Asheville, and Durham, just 4 examples. There's a lot of other examples throughout the U.S. and the Southeast, but we focused on these 4 cities. Looking at Nashville Metro, they have a section of their code called Environmental Performance Standards. And what they do is they identify what's called a critical lot. So if you got a property where you want to put a building site, a subdivision plot, that has steep slopes on it, you have to identify that as a critical lot. And if it's a critical lot, then there's some limits on how you do any kind of grading and where you put your building to minimize the disturbance of the slope. They also limit grading and filling in the floodplain to no more than 50%. So they do have some constraints on how you can develop in the floodplain. In Knoxville, they currently have a policy as it relates to hillsides, so not an ordinance. They have a policy that basically creates some design alternatives. So if you're going to do development on steep slopes, you have some options to reduce your right-of-way width, your curb width, to minimize grading on slopes. They also have a policy that limits the overall density. So if somebody was to do a rezoning request, staff uses that as a guide to recommend approval or denial or rezoning request. They also have in their city code a requirement for trying to retain at least 6 trees per acre, and if you can't, if you clear a site, they have a tree replanting requirement to replace it at least at a rate of 8 trees per acre. I should also note their stormwater regulations require you preserve at least 50% of the floodplain. In Asheville, North Carolina, they have a unified development code. Their approach is a little different. They actually apply their standards based on where you are on the slope. So think of the bottom, the middle, and the top. If you're in the bottom part of the slope, there's a set of standards they use. Then they have a set of standards for the mid-range, and then standards for the actual ridge line. A little more complex, but essentially it's the same thing. It limits grading, impervious surface, and overall density in those situations. And then I'll conclude with Durham. Durham, North Carolina, has a unified development code that limits the amount of grading to no more than 15% of an existing steep slope can be graded. If you're reconstructing a slope, trying to reestablish one, it can't exceed a grade of 50%. And they actually give you credit for preserving steep slopes of 15%. So they actually apply some incentives there to encourage their protection. In Chattanooga, currently we don't have any zoning standards. Of all those I've pointed to, we don't have any, we have a policy that kind of, if you look at some of our plans, it says conservation is recommended, low intensity development is recommended, but there's no specific standards or guides that help us in doing the rezoning request in terms of looking at a design as appropriate or not. You can have full development, full fill in the floodplain. There's no limits on how much of the floodplain you can fill, and yet, as long as you provide the base elevation of at least 1 foot above base flood, you're good to go. There are no density bonuses for protecting steep slopes of floodplains, and there's no tree planting requirements for clearing out wooded slopes. Okay, now looking at permitting and enforcement, we reviewed that. One of the challenges we identified when we went on our site visit was that sites are being cleared without a clear plan for how they're going to be stabilized or how it's going to be developed. So a lot of times what folks might do is they're trying to move a project along, the applicant, and so they'll go ahead and file for their land clearing permit without a specific development plan. What am I gonna put there? Where am I gonna put the building? Where am I gonna put the driveway? So they go in and apply for a land disturbing permit. Well, that area be cleared but not be stabilized for a long period of time, which creates problems down the road as erosion takes place. So there are actually standards that TDEC already has, state code, that require stabilization within 7 days for if you're clearing a slope that's 35% or steeper. You can see the standards there. So what staff has already done is they're requiring more due diligence. So if you're going to apply for a land disturbing permit, you have to, if it's a steep slope, you have to provide designs on how you're going to stabilize that slope before it's issued. So they've already changed process in terms of permitting review procedures. In terms of construction site management, the issue that we identified there was that there are situations where you're having multiple violations, but the enforcement process wasn't aggressive enough to get movement on cleaning up the situation. And so the LDO staff have increased their enforcement procedure. So essentially it's called the 3 strikes rule. You get a verbal warning for the first violation. Second violation, you get a written warning. And then if you're still having issues, you get a notice of violation with 7 days to fix, and the entire site gets shut down. What that means is no contractors, period, allowed on the site, unless it's for addressing the spill issue or the site management issue. So if you have questions for Dallas, he's here, but my understanding it's really worked real well. They're seeing a lot of improvement in performance as a result of that change in staff procedure. So I also want to be clear about this. There is a strong connection between zoning and the permitting side. And I want to use the analogy of this room. Okay, we have this room, and we could figure out a design, so we could probably get 300 people in here if we put enough architects and engineers in our room to figure it out, right? We'll probably come up with an engineer solution for that. But the question is, do we want to put us through all that trouble of trying to figure out how to get 300 people in this room? When it might be more appropriate to have 100 people in this room. I see the relationship that way with zoning and permitting. Zoning kind of sets the overall magnitude, how much development intensity you can potentially have on a site. And so that creates downstream problems. If we're not clear about the overall intensity for that particular area, it puts pressure on the downstream of how am I going to design for flood control, how am I going to design for stabilization if we have too much on a particular site that has these resource limitations. So there's a strong connection. That's why it was good for us, our staff, to work with the LDO staff and kind of figuring that out. So why is development of steep slopes and floodplains an issue or concern? Well, essentially, one, we've seen just through our field work that not all development of steep slopes is a problem, but it can, if we're not careful about it, have a negative impact on our scenic quality of our city. Because once you start grading those ridges, those wooded hillsides, here that define the scenic characteristic of our community, once they've been graded, you don't get that back. So I think that we got to be careful about how we think about development on our ridges. The other thing that's a fact of physics is you have higher rates of stormwater runoff and greater risk of slippage on steep slopes. They're more unstable soils typically on a steep slope than you do on a flatter piece of land. Talking about floodplains, yes, you can build a floodplain, but you also put yourself at higher risk. The floodplain is called the floodplain for a reason, and that's because there is a higher rate risk. You do have flood insurance for that, but it doesn't mean your property won't get flooded over the course of your 30-year mortgage. So that's why you see examples of like Knoxville and Nashville that say, you know what, you can develop, we're going to limit 50% of the floodplain can be developed as opposed to 100% in Chattanooga. So I do think that's something we need to think about. I think the other thing I would offer for floodplains is that they are static. I mean, they're not static, but they're moving targets. And what I mean by that, there's a modeling process that goes into establishing a floodplain that based on certain assumptions. The model that we have in play, as I understand, is about at least 15 years old. And it's based on development pattern assumptions for a watershed that's 15 years old. So it hasn't factored in all the new development that's taken place since that modeling was done. You also have, as anybody's been around lately, we've seen a little more frequent critical storm events. So there's a lot of changing factors that are actually probably putting a higher level of risk for development in the floodplains than might have been in the past. So I think we need to be thinking carefully about that. Again, I want to emphasize this, that it does not mean that you should not, or it's not possible to develop in the floodplain or steep slope. The question is, what's the appropriate way to go about doing that? So here's some questions I'll leave with you all tonight as we get into the public hearing process. That I would think we as staff would like some feedback from both the community and council. One is, what values, principles, and priorities should inform how we develop this tool? I think it's very important. There's a reason that every city has a different approach, because every city has a different set of values that its community shares. So we want to know, what are the values, what are the Chattanooga values that you want to drive this process? Secondly, should we address steep slopes, floodplains, or both? There's been this discussion back and forth, should it be more focused on steep slopes as opposed to floodplains, or both? We need to know that. Second, should we start with a policy that apply to rezoning requests only, or do we need an ordinance? Again, the difference there, a policy would only apply to a rezoning process, so if somebody's rezoning a piece of property would use it, whereas an ordinance, it would apply even if you already got your zoning. So you just got to give that some thought. Fourthly, what site development activities should be addressed? These examples I gave you, not everybody's doing it the same way. You got land clearing, you got grading, you got development intensity, you got revegetation. Those are all different things we could potentially take a look at. Finally, should incentives be considered as for preserving these areas? Do we give bonuses if you preserve it to create a way to encourage their preservation? And finally, I do want to draw this distinction in particular, how we balance protection of our sensitive areas while also meeting our city's housing needs. Because we are growing as a city, we've got to put housing somewhere. And so I do think we've got to give careful consideration if we are limiting development of steep slopes or floodplains, then where does that housing go? So I'll leave that with you all tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. Before we get started, Councilman Ledford, the chairs the zoning committee, would like to make a comment, and then we will move into the public hearing portion of our meeting. Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to give you a little backstory on why we're here and why I think this is so important. After May 15, 2015, cities in Tennessee can no longer annex property without a referendum or by owner's consent. This is important to note because our city relies on property tax for a majority of its annual revenue. Directly translated, we have to develop or redevelop within our boundaries while maintaining and serving the needs of a growing population and aging infrastructure. Tonight's hearing is crucial for our city in the future planning and zoning process because it directly addresses a problem that is long overdue for attention. It is essential because we have to be responsible in future developments and even stronger stewards of the land that we have left in our city limits. This process comes with challenges, and I believe this council is going to tackle and address. And as chairman of the Planning and Zoning Committee, I think it is time to begin this process, and the first step starts with you. In the same breath, it is not our intent to hinder or to cause complications for home builders, but to set forth clarity and standards that will define expectations for steep slopes and floodplains on the forefront and not solely on a case-by-case basis. We all understand the responsibility and need for more housing opportunities and also realize what implications policy can have on the affordability of homes. It is in this essential public hearing that we hope to learn from you, stakeholders, home builders, and anyone interested in how future development occurs on these susceptible properties. While other cities have already placed into action plans for steep slopes and floodplain development, we hope tonight will yield fruitful information in moving Chattanooga forward. And I want to thank my co-sponsor on the resolution asking RPA to begin this process, Councilman Jared Mitchell, for his passion and dedication to this issue. And I also want to thank my colleagues on this council for your dedication, the city and RPA staff for their support and their hard work and input as we discuss this very significant topic. Tonight's hearing is designed to hear concerns, ideas, solutions, problems, and to listen to general discussion about steep slope and floodplain development. I ask you to please do not use this time to bring forth any personal displeasure or opposition to any particular project, and please refrain from naming any specific individuals or companies that you may have personal interaction. Tonight is not a public trial, it is a public hearing, an opportunity to learn from each other, and to move forward in proposing standards that promote responsible development and clear expectations. I yield the floor, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, for anybody in the audience who would like to address the council on this item, again, you will be allowed 3 minutes, so if you would like, please make your way over to the podium, and when you begin, just give us your name, and you are welcome to.
Yes, my name is Christopher Dahl, and I reside at 2020 East 12th Street. I'd like to start off saying it was mentioned that we have development, or that we need it. Yes, we do, but that's to oblige the bond agreements that we have. So steep slope development, I just hope that we go by the EPA standards that come out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We hear about values. Well, water quality, that's an important value, because every time it rains, it seems like we have more sediment entering our waterways, and sewer overflows. So, our water quality is going down. We heard about TDEC. TDEC, yes, they issue permits, but the permits that they issue, they're called NPDES permits, they only deal with quantity, not quality. So it's this board, when you guys make the decision, you guys will be dealing with the quality of water and ensuring that our quality, stays above average. It seems like this is being pushed because they want to develop out White Oak Mountain and Ooltewah, but it has to also be taken in consideration that historically, White Oak Mountain's been strip mined for 2 different wars over the history of White Oak Mountain. So what can citizens do? We can call the EPA land office at 1-800-882-5263, or we can call the Chattanooga City Inspector at 643-5837, or we can call the EPA Regional Enforcement Office at 404-562-9576, or even the Public Works of Chattanooga at 643-5012. Thanks and have a great rest of the day.
Chelsea Breedy-Oyer. I'm the president of the St. Elmo Neighborhood Association. As you all know, we're situated right between Hawkins Ridge and Lookout Mountain, so a little valley between 2 steep slopes. There's been a lot of talk about steep slopes in the neighborhood, pretty much at every neighborhood meeting since I've been the president of the association. I wanted to share that back in June, on June 4th, at our neighborhood association meeting, Tim McDonald, who's going to speak right after me, came to us with a resolution that he wrote concerning steep slopes, particularly in our neighborhood, and of course all of Chattanooga. He'll read the resolution and go over exactly what that says, but I just wanted to share the results of a vote we took concerning that resolution. We had 32 people in attendance at that night's meeting. 24 in attendance voted in favor, 0 were against the resolution, and 8 people abstained from voting. And Tim will read to you now a little bit more about that steep slope resolution.
Thank you, Chelsea. As Chelsea said, I'm Tim McDonald, and pardon me, I have a small packet of personal fuel tax notes around to the council. You have a copy of the resolution there, and I'm going to just read a very brief portion of it. You have also a copy of page 1 of the executive summary from our land use plan in St. Elmo that was adopted by the city and regional planning back a number of years ago after a lot of input from the community. And you have a couple of photographs of steep slopes causing some issues with erosion and slippage, as John mentioned in his presentation. So I won't read the entire resolution, but basically what we're asking the city to do is to not only acknowledge our land use plan, but to follow it. It was put together a number of years ago with input, as I said, from the community, a lot of thought, several meetings went into it. I remember clearly the process. It was, again, accepted by the council at the time and by regional planning. So the Community Association of Historic St. Elmo voted in its regular meeting of June 4th, 2018, by a majority vote of members present strongly endorsing the above provisions of the land use plan. And those provisions are that steep slopes are preserved and conserved. If you'll notice in the first page of the executive summary, about 2/3 of the way down on the right-hand side, I highlighted conserve steep slopes. The land use plan recognizes the inherent issues with steep slope development and simply says we need to conserve them. We're asking that the city abide by that. So we recommend that all city and county agencies with jurisdictional authority observe the above stated recommendations of the land use plan, and they are stated there in the body of the resolution. There is a reason the land use plan recommends conservation. John alluded to some of those things. There are specific soil types on Lookout Mountain and Hawkins Ridge that do not lend themselves to being disturbed. They do not compact. They erode quickly. They erode in a lot of dirt going downhill, and they cause a number of issues. We also have concerns about runoff, stormwater runoff, and it is an issue. So again, we're simply asking that you consider the land use plan and please abide by it. Thank you.
I'm Jim Faulkner, and I live on Mountain Creek Road. I want to thank John for showing some slides on Mountain Creek where we have had some flooding in some flood zone areas where people are trying to build houses. First of all, I certainly understand the issue of flood zones. I really don't understand why people build in a flood zone at all, as far as houses. I understand businesses, they don't worry so much if you've got some manufacturing in the back. We can't take that away. But why anybody would build a house in a flood, in a 100-year flood zone, I just don't get it. I myself live on a hill. I'm on a steep slope. And I'm very concerned about any development like that. I've done some development. We've never, ever had a problem with anybody responsible for everything we've done. And I just want to say that for the hundreds and maybe thousands of people that do live on slopes, that we'd like to not be grandfathered in. We want to obey all the rules. And we want to not have any problem with water runoff. But if a few developers don't do it right, I just hope that rules will be written so that they are constrained from doing things that harm other people. We do have a limited amount of land in Chattanooga, and we do want to restore, we want to keep the property rights for everybody. We don't want to diminish the value of the property, therefore diminishing the tax base. But we do want to all work together. In so doing, I would extend my hand and understand people that are concerned about these issues. If you wish to place some kind of a moratorium or something like that on development outside of 1 or 2 lots where real development is going on, I would support a moratorium on this sort of thing for very steep slopes and certainly for floodplains where people might be suffering. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Carolyn Cuppage, I live in Chattanooga. First of all, I just wanted to thank the council and the city for doing something about this, because I think it's a huge problem, and I think it's a great opportunity for all of us to work together to do something to preserve Chattanooga. Just a couple of points. One is, this seems like a really complex issue, and just to answer, I think we should be looking at both steep slopes and floodplains, but I feel like it's super complicated, and that we need to be, and I'm sure that we have had some science behind all of these possible provisions, but I think we need to be looking at more than just what they're doing in North Carolina or the rest of Tennessee. I think we should be there's a lot of steep slopes around the country. I think we need to kind of broaden our horizon and maybe look at what other people are doing outside of the southeast. We do have a huge problem with the stormwater runoff, which I think is really affecting the quality of our water. You know, I live in St. Elmo. There's been a lot of slopes that have been degraded, and just if it rains for an hour, there's a lot of stormwater runoff. And I don't think people get, like, that water is going directly into the river, and it's really bad for the environment. It's really bad for the river, and we get our drinking water out of that river. So I think we need to look at how a lot of this is impacting the water that we drink, and also, you know, the scenic fabric of the city, I think, is also being affected by this. But the other point I just wanted to ask about is, it seems like FEMA would have some regulations on, you know, what should be built in a floodplain, and I'm just curious as to what the science is behind a lot of the proposals that are being made. And like in Asheville, 6 trees per acre. What's the size requirement of the tree? I mean, what's the age of the tree? Because, you know, you can have a 3-inch diameter mimosa tree is a lot different than having a 200-year-old old-growth oak tree on your soil. So I hope some of those things are being considered. And I thank you all for your time very much.
Hi, I'm Beth Van Dusen. I live in North Chattanooga. I'm with the Baker Hilltop Neighborhood Association. And I too would like to thank you all for taking on this issue. It really is long overdue and so important. You know, as I'm sure everyone is aware, everything that's easy has been built on. So that's why we're having to deal with this now, is because the flat stuff is gone. And so now we have these delicate areas that are being at times irresponsibly developed. So I would like to, just from the questions, to think about, I too agree that it should be both steep slopes and floodplains, and I would really like to encourage the policy applied both to rezoning and to things that have been already zoned, because the things that are already zoned are just as important as a potential rezoning case. And I would even agree with the fact that until this can be decided, to have some kind of moratorium on developing on steep slopes until we can decide what would be appropriate. I mean, I'm no expert. I can't say if the slope is more than 3-to-1, it should be this much density. But I think there need to be specific regulations, and it shouldn't be a suggestion. It needs to be clear. And for both intensity and density in these types of developments. Again, I have nothing specific. I just think this is so important, and I really so appreciate you all taking a look at this issue. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Angela Dittmar. I live on Oak Street. I work at UTC, and I'm a member of the South Chickamauga Creek Greenway Alliance. The Alliance is a citizens advocacy group for our water and watershed quality. We formed in 1994. And our chairman, Sandy Kurtz, could not be here today, but she asked that I read a statement from her. I have some copies I'd like to share. So this is dated today, October 30th, to council members and interested citizens. Before there were greenways in Chattanooga, I was appointed by Mayor Gene Roberts to the Greenways Committee. We worked with the National Park Service's Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance to figure out where and how to put greenways. The first question was, what makes Chattanooga, Chattanooga? What makes the city the way it is? After discussion and citizen input, it was determined that what makes Chattanooga, Chattanooga is steep slopes and stream corridors. Of course, we know that every time we ask people what's important to Chattanooga, they say scenic beauty. That is those steep forested slopes and streams. I fear we are slowly eating away the stream corridors due to filling up of floodplains and wetlands, resulting in erosion from development and flooding. And we have also done a very poor job of protecting our steep slopes, primarily due to the drive of development to the lands that are hard to build on, mainly steep slopes. Yes, land for building is becoming scarcer, but that is no excuse to destroy the very essence of what makes Chattanooga, Chattanooga, and further damage its already threatened its ecosystem. A little while after we had envisioned a greenway plan for the Tennessee River as the spine, The President's Council for Sustainable Development chose Chattanooga as one of the cities to address how to sustainably develop. There were several task forces formed and I participated in the one for land use. We created a matrix for development that identified lands as buildable, sensitive, and off limits for development. It wasn't that one couldn't build on sensitive lands, but there were extra requirements that assured the sustainability for each piece of land. Those had to do with requiring a higher percentage of open land on a parcel, little or no timber cutting, and prevention of stormwater runoff and erosion. That plan is on the shelf somewhere. Perhaps it is time to update. And I'm going to skip ahead. So she suggests that fines for violations should be high enough that developers can't build them into their costs. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kevin Kalikowski. I appreciate this opportunity to learn about this issue. I just want to say a couple things quickly. I think developers are calling the shots, at least in the neighborhood where I live. And developers, bless their hearts, want to develop. And yet, talking about values, the developers versus the citizens want to maintain the quality of life. I've lived in Chattanooga for only 2 years, but I've heard it called the scenic city, tree city, outdoor city, and I think those things are in peril, and that type of city is in peril if we don't have regulations that developers can understand and follow and make them accountable, and make those ordinances enforceable through proper staffing of the appropriate agencies and so forth. I kind of like the Nashville plan of those 4 that were shown, where especially that aspect where they said you had to have 7,500 square feet of property on a steep slope or in a floodplain to develop according to the zoning ordinances. That seemed like a pretty reasonable approach. Anyway, thank you.
My name is Bruce Blum. I'm in 37411, and I'm here, and I want to commend both Commissioner Ledford, Commissioner Mitchell for taking this on. There's no question about the fact that we all recognize that developing our community and maintaining the assets is going to be essential for those assets in the future to remain what they are. One other point I'd like to make is that I think some folks have brought it up about the water quality. What many may not realize is that today where we're starting is every single creek, every single stream, every single one of our Chattanooga water bodies is already impaired. By every measure, we are working with impaired streams. These are streams that don't perform what they are intended to, which means corrections are needed. So I hope that as we move forward, those kind of issues, the habitat, the things that make Chattanooga great, our impaired streams can be addressed as a part of the solution.
in North Chattanooga, where I live, the infrastructure is very old. There's not a lot of room for streets to expand. So when you talk about this, it overlaps with all kinds of infrastructure issues, not just the water system issues, but even emergency vehicle access issues on steep slopes and what that means. In my neighborhood at the moment, you're blocked 10, 15 minutes frequently on streets due to high density. And I understand high density in downtown areas is navigable, but I think that we need to look at what that means on steep slope development, because there's no room to expand the sidewalks. Thompson Avenue, I encourage all of you to take a look and just drive down that street. There's no room for the sidewalk to expand. The doorways are right there, and the steep slope doesn't allow that street to get any wider for vehicle access. It's only 19 feet wide. The recommendation is 26 feet wide for emergency vehicles. That's already posing a problem, and there's development after development on that street. In fact, there's proposed condos on that street. We've told the fire marshal can't weigh in on those sorts of issues, because when they put infrastructure in the building itself to fire code, that takes care of the issue, and unless it's like over 24 units or something like that. Anyway, also about the trees replacement, what does it mean to have a tree ordinance? So yes, you can put new trees on it, but what if they're an inch wide? That doesn't really help with maybe it helps long term, but doesn't help immediately. Also, what about school zoning? I'm just saying maybe density happens in these areas when there's other areas that could be that could handle more development, but they're happening where developers can make money, and they're making money where the schools are nice. Thank you.
My name is Justin Turson. I live in the Belvoir community, and I actually wanted to talk from a different perspective. First, I wanted to commend Councilman Ledford and Mitchell for taking on such a difficult and complex issue. From a development point of view, there's really one thing I hear from developers time and time again as a city planner working with different developers in the city, and it's a fear of variables. And in the last 11 months here in Chattanooga, elected officials and staff have tried diligently to come up with ways to try to protect steep slopes. But the issue has been inconsistency. They've tried to limit where you can build by developing on topo grades, limiting the slope ratio, limiting the number of units, limiting occasionally vegetation removal. Different for each case. And that creates an issue as well. And I think that the development community would like to see some sort of process in place that creates clarity in that aspect. And so we would very much like to see either a policy that has more specific guidelines and standards to it, or an ordinance that does take into account the nuance of steep slopes, not just on ridges, but also as they occur in natural other topographies within the city. The inconsistency that we see is generally because there are many different ways to tackle this, and I hope that through this process you guys will take the opportunity to look at not just other cities as how they've looked at it, but also how the professional planning organization for the national level has addressed different mechanisms, including transferable development rights, that allow for what was talked about earlier, the opportunity to be able to create not only a stick mechanism, but also a carrot mechanism to encourage development where we want to see that happen and lessen development where we need protection. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Sarah Page, and I'm a licensed architect here in Chattanooga. I would like to reiterate what Justin was just talking about when talking about consistency in policy. One of the issues that we come up with often when we are planning a development is that we may not find out about some conditional zoning variance that had been granted or special ordinance on a site-by-site basis until much further along the planning process. And if you want something to keep costs down, consistency and knowledge of what is expected of you up front is the best way to do that. Nothing can kill a project faster than having some unforeseen condition foisted upon you unknowingly when you're almost done and you're ready to build a project and have your financing in order. Another thing that can really help is to not only set the stick, but to also set the carrot. Developers, architects, anyone will do the minimum of what you tell them to do, but they're going to do the best that they can to not spend any more money than that. So you can't offer
offer some sort of incentive or bonus for going above and beyond what is required. I think that would be a great opportunity to offset some of the previous damage that has been done in development in the area. Another option would be to offer incentives for redeveloping parcels that have been developed already, that may already have a large amount of impervious area, but are not currently serving their highest and best use for the communities. Another issue that I've seen a lot, especially in residential neighborhoods, that is a huge concern to me is if we're talking about property values in our tax base, there's a huge issue for the poor people who are living downhill of the new developments. Yes, it's great that we're putting more properties kind of on the tax rolls, as it were, but if we're depreciating the value of the properties downhill from those new developments, we kind of end up with a wash at the end of the day. So I just want to thank you all for your time and thank you for considering this matter.
Good evening. If I'm not mistaken, regardless if you are a landowner or a renter, somebody pays the taxes on that house. So regardless if it's a pass-through, or if the individual who owns the house actually pays the taxes are paid. So if we look at density, if we look at slope, I look at East Chat. We live on Sherman Street, and if we get 1 inch of rain, I gotta put on rain boots. They talking about slope. We have to be smart when it comes to the design of our communities. And I believe that looking at the turnout, it's overwhelming that these people say that they don't want this. Appreciate and recognize their decision, but also go out into the community and knock on doors and see what people want, because we got a situation in East Chat right now that will change our environment for the next 50 years. And I'm not going to say that the representatives aren't listening, but the concessions that have been made are not equal to what we want. If these people pay these taxes and they pay their money to fund the government, do what they ask. This is not a stupid conversation that's going on right now. These people say no, and they come out. We got 100 people out here. Excuse me, 70. We got 70 people out here. But what happens if you got a voter who is a single mama and she don't have anybody to watch her kids at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock to come out here? Do we take that person's perspective? We gotta be more creative when we come to these decisions, because what's happening is that we are spending millions of dollars. Our city is rich. We got a AAA Moody's rating. We got money. Are we willing to sacrifice to make the homeowners happy, the people that's living in the neighborhood happy, who in turns will make sure that the community is straight? Because what we're looking at right now is a lack of community.
I don't even begin to know how to follow that. There we go. That's really awesome. I would like to touch on a point that was made about balancing affordable housing with the environment. To me, this city has brought in a lot of revenue off tourists. Tourists who come here to climb, paddle, bike, hike. I don't know how to put a price on the value of our green space, but it seems pretty enormous, and it could be perpetuated. I would like to see a code, because I believe a code has more teeth than a policy. I would like to see it retroactive, and I would also like to err, so to speak, on the side of overprotection, because I don't think we can do wrong with that. I think that things could be adjusted down the road, but they almost always tend to loosen instead of tighten. So I would like to see a very tight policy put in place. I would also like to back up that point of having steep fines, very steep fines, that they cannot roll into the cost of the house, but have to take the hit themselves directly. I also cannot comprehend, for an instant, the development of Lookout Mountain, the side of Lookout Mountain, our iconic image of this city, over and over, everywhere you look. And it's a green iconic image, and I can't imagine that being developed. So I hope y'all take a very serious approach to this code policy. I hope you definitely look at the science behind this, because there's very real science put forth by the U.S. Geological Survey on the soil types of Lookout Mountain and surrounding areas. And I think for the safety of people that are downhill from those slopes, that it should be strongly taken into consideration. Thank you very much for considering.
Ma'am, what was your name?
Sorry, Lynn Bartoletti.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, well, my name is Gary Satin. I happen to live in an older neighborhood, which is in East Brainerd near Chickamauga Creek, Graysville Road. And it seems like it's an old development that's been approved in 2007. I believe it falls under the grandfather's clause. But I've been getting a lot of storm runoff from that development. I had an engineer from the city come there, and he told me that where there is a stormwater ditch, should have been to guide the water off to another ditch, is no longer there. I have all the paperwork that he sent me. I've had blueprints sending me to me, and the city has done nothing except look and say, yeah. No one's ever walked in there and seen that the silt fence is not operable. It's not collecting silt, it's collecting actually earth that's flowing over the silt fence. I'm having land development from Tennessee come to my home next week and get some more information. So it seems like the city doesn't want to help me out either. So I can understand where you people are coming from. Have a good day, everybody, and I hope we get this thing done.
Good evening. My name is Neil Nestler. I'm a North Chattanooga resident. Been involved in real estate for a very long time. Thank you for the council for looking at this issue. I think it's time. And then also RPA and Land Development Office and Building Inspection. I think that together, I know it's going to take time to get to the right solutions, and I look forward to it for the city as a whole and all the citizens. A few things I want to say. Coming into this, I've never really thought about steep slopes too much. It's kind of a new thought process for me over the last maybe year. And so when I heard about this meeting, I certainly wanted to come and hear more about it. And I'm still thinking about it. You know, hearing John Bridger up here earlier, it's really interesting. My concept of steep slope is water runoff. But there is the other concept of steep slope. The lady before me said exactly what I was thinking. What would this city be like with houses all over Lookout Mountain, a subdivision along the side? I believe in development. So I do believe in development. I also believe in responsible development. I don't have the answers. I don't think everyone else has the answers yet. That's why we're all here talking about it now. It's going to take the city time to get to that ordinance. I would like to suggest an ordinance where you're looking at not just rezoning, but also existing zoning. If they don't have to go, existing zoning where they don't have to come up in front of the board. Because I think there would be too many lots of record that could slip through on this thing. Okay? So I think that's important to look at. But from there, while the city's looking at this, while RPA is looking at it, and everyone else, I would like to take this back to the citizens, because one thing that I've learned for myself over the last year is that I've been around real estate for a long time. I believe we all know if your roof is old and starts leaking, you need to put a new roof on your house. You got to be responsible for the maintenance of your own house. It's really come into my thought process over the last year We don't need to just maintain our house, we need to maintain our property rights. And I encourage the citizens to start stepping forward and being responsible for their own property rights. If you're a farmer and you're raising cattle, and someone stops the creek running on your property, you've responsibly got to go make sure that water is being released the way it's supposed to. Come to learn in Tennessee, you're supposed to release water in like kind. No more, no less. If that's not happening, if it's affecting you in a negative way, it's your responsibility to enforce that. It might cost attorney's fees, and I'm sorry for that, but a new roof is a new roof also. But I think that the city council moving this forward over time will be able to help things and get a good policy in place. But until then, we need to remember that we got to maintain our own property rights and fight for what's right. Currently, I'm in the middle of a lawsuit with someone with water runoff. Do I want to be? Hell no. But I'm having to protect my property rights. I saw a post online recently. Someone was saying their hot water heater keeps going out because of water. That person needs to enforce their property rights. Thank you.
Some of the problem I'm seeing on some of this is, they say we want to put properties and stuff, some everywhere. Like when I go out to North Chattanooga, they put houses, places that I wouldn't even put a house at the magnitude of the prices that they're paying for those houses. But there's plenty of land in Chattanooga, it's just that we're not developing some of these, properties that's not undesirable for some people to come to. We got to try to get some of these contractors to come to these other neighborhoods and start putting houses where especially out there where I live at. We just got to clean these areas up, and we got to encourage and get the council and other people to encourage people to come to some of these areas that contractors don't want to come to. Because what I see, like you take gun barrel and all that, they pile all that stuff up out there and just made it a mess. They piled stuff up in North Chattanooga and just made it a mess. But this place is to spread this stuff out and make the wealth good for everybody. Now downstream, what I want to know is what we're going to do. Like I heard somebody say, what are we going to do for the people that get impacted by these companies that come in and build their land up and then flood the people downstream? Then they have to suffer, and then maybe they might not suffer the first 2 or 3 years. It may be a 5-year, 10-year. How do they recover from that? Because once this contractor came in here and built his property up, built his subdivision up, and flooded that person downstream and caused them misery and distress, how do they get compensated for their loss? And that's what we're gonna have to, we got to have when we do this, we're gonna have to go into this and we're gonna have to say, look, how is this gonna impact these other people downstream? Yes, this is a good thing for the city. Yes, we get bigger taxes and make everybody happy because we got some more taxes coming in. But those people downstream, or when we have to spend more money building sewage systems or something, to come back, this problem, we ain't won in the long run. So we got to consider everybody. But also, let's bring some of this development in other areas. We don't have to have it all in North Chattanooga. We don't have to have it all in Gun Barrel. We don't have to have it all on the side of Lookout Mountain. There's some other places that we can develop and make this whole city nice, not just part of it. Not everybody just want to live on one side of town. Let's bring it all back and clean it up, because we can clean it up. We're human beings, we can figure this out. It ain't no dumb problem, because we know the problem, we just got to get the solutions and fix them. And thank you for listening.
I've been there 15 years, and I live at the bottom of Lookout Mountain. And I'm super nervous because I'm very passionate about this. Literally, there is a developer, I know I'm not supposed to say names, I won't. There is a developer who owns a good bit of the lower side of Lookout Mountain. So most people think it's part of the battlefield, and it's not. It is now owned by a developer who likes to develop anywhere and everywhere. He owns the Gill Trail area, above Gill Trail, the Glen Falls Trail. It's a little nerve-wracking, a little scary to think of losing that beauty, but also nerve-wracking for me as a homeowner at the bottom with children playing in my backyard, thinking about things falling down the mountain. Thousands of dollars we just spent to deal with the water runoff off the mountain into our backyard.
you start developing land that doesn't absorb water, the runoff is exponentially greater. So once that starts, you're losing the scenery, you've got danger that is below. I'm thinking rock face in my backyard that's 20, 30 feet tall, and those rocks coming loose because of equipment and heavy equipment above me. There's no absorption by the land when the trees come down. We've already lost so many majorly big trees in St. Elmo for the development. We have a really poor sewer system. Every time I drive down through St. Elmo and during a rainstorm, I see lots of brown water running down the sides of the roads because there's just nowhere, nobody's really keeping up with the erosion from these slopes coming into our little bowl. And lastly, that leads to those polluted creeks. We have the most polluted creeks in the country, it seems. So I think about not just the scenery, the pollution, but just the safety of those below us and the properties around. Thank you.
Good evening, Council. My name is Marie Mott. I've grown up in Chattanooga all of my life. I remember when we started having development in my district. I lived on Blackford Street at the time. We had over 100-year-old weeping willow tree that was cut down because of development. I think it's important to note, and this is not to the council, but this is to the citizens, that while we congratulate the city council, they have taken a part in the overdevelopment in Chattanooga. And so it's very imperative that we hold these people who are your constituents. They are responsible for your neighborhoods. You don't have overdevelopment without their support. And so when we look at areas like East Chattanooga that my brother was talking about, we're right now in the middle of Harriet Tubman, where they want to put manufacturing where we could legitimately have homes. We could pick up the slack. There's so many empty lots. But the question is do you want to build a relationship with some of the most blighted, some of the most underserved areas where in my neighborhood we don't even have a grocery store? And so it's very important to note that we can help one another. And if we're waiting on them to step up and do what's right, then you're going to see the overdevelopment really probably happen, if I'm just being frankly honest. We're in this game a little bit too late. We should have conserved the property. We should have looked at this information before we started having a field day slicing up our city for anybody who had the money to pay. But the problem is that we don't have people with a backbone who are willing to say no. We don't have people who are willing to look out for the interests of the best people until we raise the issue ourselves, or until it gets to the impossible situation where we're backed in the corner and now we're trying to claw our way out. There is a solution for every problem, but the question before we even get there is, can we truly be honest? And I really want to encourage each and every one of you, if you live in Signal Mountain, if you live in North Shore, if you live in other areas, reach out to neighborhood associations across the city and talk to people who may not live in your neighborhood and see if we have some development that can actually be brought to our neighborhood, so we don't have to tear up the beautiful green spaces and waterways that we have that make Chattanooga one of the most beautiful places to live. I want to preserve my city because I want to raise my children here, and I want them to be able to not only work here but play here. But if we're waiting on people behind this council who is slow to answer so many questions and step up on so many issues, then I'm telling you, we're going to keep waiting. Justice is just us. It's just we the people. And I love you all, and there's nothing you can do about it.
My name is Charles Manus. I live in Lookout Valley. I have taken on Walmart ever since they runoff problem, ever since they started construction. Have gotten no satisfaction from the city or anybody that knows anything about it. They run water off their parking lot on the private property, and it runs 7 days a week. And when the county had Lookout Valley, they came out and opened up all the culverts, the ditches and stuff like that, and kept them cleaned out. But I understand that the city owns property on Astor Avenue due to the fact that it floods all the time. I mean, I figure that's your property, something more to be done. But every time we have a pretty good sized rain, the roads flood. tried to do anything about it. They were supposed to build settlement ponds on the east side of Walmart to contain the water. They never did that. They actually moved over 100 tons or better to build the mountain, we call it the mountain, where Walmart sat. They run water off the west side of it into some sediment ponds. But the east side got no whatsoever, no help whatsoever. My next door neighbor is the city fireman. He and I worked together trying to get somebody to look at this problem. My neighbors across the street got the same problem. And I just thought, I almost given up. But when I saw this in the paper, I said, I'm going to take it on again. Thank you.
All right, seeing nobody else that would like to address the council on this issue, we are going to move on to the business on our agenda this evening. Mr. Bridger?
Yeah, so we'll just stay tuned. I encourage you to post on our website. If you get our website, www.chcrpa, we'll keep you posted. We will be providing a follow-up report to City Council, the Planning and Zoning Committee. But just go to our website, and there'll be a primary link there. You can track how we move along. Thank you. Thanks.
Madam Clerk, we'll give it just 1 minute.
I do votes.
Don't ever let them shut you up like that. I love you. I love you.
All right, ordinances, final read, 5A, please.
Ordinance amending Chattanooga City Code, Chapter 16, Article 3, by adding a new Section 1658 relating to Chattanooga Housing Authority public safety officers.
Councilman Henderson.
Move for approval.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed is nay. Repeat, please.
An ordinance amending Chattanooga City Code, Part 2, Chapter 24, Section 2450, prohibited use of handheld mobile telephone in marked school zone, prohibited use of mobile telephone with hands-free device by persons under 18.
I've got Councilman Henderson, followed by Councilman Gilbert.
Move approval.
I'd like to make an amendment to this ordinance.
All right, let's get a second, get it on the floor. And then we'll talk about it. All right, I've got a motion and a second. Councilman Gilbert, you'd like to discuss the amendment, sir?
Yeah, I'd like an amendment. I would like for our attorney to read that amendment.
At Councilman Gilbert's request, there are two portions to this ordinance, and he had requested that it be placed into two different sections as two separate ordinances. And the revision that he has requested would be to have section 24-50, which would be the amendment to add a new section 2450 entitled Prohibited Use of Handheld Mobile Telephone in Marked School Zones to be one ordinance, and then a separate ordinance, which would be 2451, to add a new section 2451 entitled Prohibited Use of Mobile Telephones with Hands-Free Devices by Persons under 18. And I have prepared, at least at his request, copies of those ordinances. It basically splits the ordinance you currently have into two separate ordinances. And it puts provisions in here that this would also follow the current provisions of TCA 558207 regarding those separate devices. And it simply splits it into two different ordinances.
And by that, Mr. Attorney, it would be two separate ordinances, two votes as well, correct?
Correct. It would have to go back to first reading if you do that.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
And Councilman Gilbert, that's in the form of a motion, sir.
Yes, sir.
Is there a second on that motion? Alright. I've got a motion and a second on the amendment to split these into two ordinances, which will take it back to first read. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed is nay. And then I will need a motion as amended.
I'll make a motion on the amendment.
And Mr. Attorney, since we're moving and amending, that would need to be two separate motions, correct? Can you read the first one that we are moving as amended, please?
Yes, sir. The first one would be an ordinance amending Chattanooga City Code Part 2, Chapter 24 to add a new section 2450 entitled Prohibited Use of Handheld Mobile Telephone in Marked School Zone.
All right, I've got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed is nay. Mr. Attorney, let's read the second one as amended.
The second one as amended is an ordinance amending Chattanooga City Code Part 2, Chapter 24 to add a new section 2451 entitled Prohibited Use of Mobile Telephone with Hands-Free Device by Persons under 18.
Motion to move that.
I have a motion to approve that amendment and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed is nay. All right. Mr. Attorney, you have those so that they will be on the final read next week.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, when you're ready, let's go on to see.
An ordinance amending Chattanooga City Code Part 2, Chapter 24, Section 24443, lights required on motor vehicles, exceptions, regulations as to color, type, and visibility distance.
Councilman Henderson?
Move approval.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed is nay. Thank you. Madam Clerk, ordinances first read. Let's look at 6A, please.
An ordinance closing and abandoning a portion of the 1200 block of East 28th Street to allow for site modifications to improve public safety as detailed on the attached map, subject to certain conditions.
Pleasure. I have a motion to approve and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed is nay. Thank you. Moving on to resolution 7A, please.
A resolution amending resolution number 29515 entitled, a resolution authorizing the use of grass buster lawn maintenance as primary vendor for abatement services and AB property preservation, and secondary vendor for abatement services to the following. A resolution authorizing the Department of Economic and Community Development, Codes Division, to enter into an agreement with grass buster lawn maintenance and AB property preservation for an amount not to exceed $260,000 for property abatement services.
It's a pleasure.
Move for approval.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Opposed is nay. 2B, please.
A resolution authorizing the approval of change order number 1 final for WO Construction Company, Inc. of Livingston, Tennessee, relative to contract number W15001-201, MBWWTP Detritus Rehabilitation, a non-consent decree project to release a contingency amount of $135,000 for a decreased amount of $181,361.55 for revised contract amount not to exceed $2,481,514.45.
Councilman Henderson.
Move approval.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed is nay. See, please.
A resolution amending resolution number 29631 to authorize the administrator for the Department of Transportation to enter into a contract with Wright Brothers Construction Company, Inc. for construction services associated with citywide resurfacing contract number T180062014 for an amount not to exceed $3,393,383.30.
Councilman Mitchell.
Move approval.
Second. A motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed is nay. Thank you. We have no purchases this evening. Takes us to other business. Is there any other business council would like to discuss this evening before we move on to these certifications for grocery stores wishing to sell wine? Councilman Overby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to remind everybody that next week, meeting will be at 4 o'clock. And, as my colleague, Councilman, Gilbert has been alluding to, everybody please get out and vote. Your vote counts and your vote is important, but keep in mind that next week's meeting is at 4 o'clock. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Reiterating, next week's meeting is at 4 o'clock. Thank you. Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to appoint Sylvester Harris to the Multicultural Advisory Board.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. See what happens when you show up? Councilman Gilbert.
Just a reminder, everybody, November the 1st is the last day for early vote. Your vote does count, so please go out and vote.
Thank you, sir. All right, Mr. Attorney, let's move on to approval of certification for new grocery stores. You just need to read on these and signatures, sir?
Yes, sir. We'll need to read. We have three new grocery stores. They're actually convenience stores by Circle K. One is at 64 Hickson Pike in District 3. The other one's 5501 Highway 153 in District 3. And the last one is 6239 on Highway 58 in District 6. And I do need to have at least 5 signatures to that per the ordinance.
Good on those rounds, sir? Thank you. All right, moving on to committee reports. Councilwoman Burrs.
No reports, sir.
Councilman Byrd.
No report, sir.
Councilwoman Coonrod.
No reports.
Councilman Gilbert.
No report.
Councilman Henderson. Councilman Leonard.
We will have a planning and zoning committee report next Tuesday. We will be starting at 2 o'clock our agenda session, so we will be moving rather quickly, so 2 o'clock at our agenda session.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have Public Works and Transportation Committee meeting this afternoon, and we'll have another one in 2 weeks.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Overby.
No report.
Thank you, sir. Brings us to the point on our agenda of recognition of persons wishing to address the council on non-agenda matters. Mr. Attorney, we have at least one. Would you please read the rules?
Sure. Anyone wanting to speak in front of the council this evening has to abide by the rules the council has adopted. You need to come up to the microphone to be recognized for that purpose. Only talk to the council about something that's within their legislative and quasi-judicial authority. Limit your remarks to 5 minutes unless permission for additional time is provided. Don't use vulgar or obscene language, and do not use the floor to personally attack or personally denigrate others at this point in time. All comments that you make should be directed to the entire council, not to individual members as you go along. And the chair is prohibited from recognizing any person more than twice in the 30-day time period. I think you're okay, Mr. Dodd.
Hello, my name is Christopher Dahl, and I live at 2020 East 12th Street. I would like to first let everyone know that last week was Freedom of Speech Week, and that Ben Franklin said, freedom of speech is a pillar of free government. When this support is taken away, the constitution of a free society is dissolved. Second, I am here to mention the Supreme Court decision Janus versus the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Why is this case so important that it has to be mentioned? Well, it ended the practice of mandatory union dues. And I asked for this council to start the procedures or create a resolution that abolishes this practice in our CPD police department. I'd like to finish off by asking how many here care about water quality. Any show of hands. I know there was many people earlier here, and many of them left. I asked this question due to the city's interlocal agreement with the Hamilton County Wastewater Treatment Authority and other municipalities. The reason why is just this past week out in Ottawa at Heritage Golf Course, there was a massive sewer spill that had been reported for 5 months, and they just now finally done something about. There's also, it could appear that capacity may be at volume, where they've used up all the capacity, and so with the overdevelopment of the Ottawa going down those pipes cannot make it to the treatment plant. There was also another massive spill out in Walker County, Georgia, which, you know, they send their waste to the Moccasin Bend treatment plant as well through being middleman from the Hamilton County Wastewater Treatment Authority. So I hope these matters are taken into consideration, you know, because with the more development, we see increased stormwater runoff, we see increased sewer overflows. And so this just concerns me because, you know, I hope that our drinking water doesn't become to a point where it's highly contaminated. Thanks and have a great rest of the day.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Ezra Harris, and I'm the chairman of the North Reading Community Council. And a couple of weeks ago, of course, we had what we call National Night Out. And I want to thank two of you, Councilman here, Councilman Ledford, and also Councilman Gilbert, for your support in every way. You did a lot of things for our community. And even though Ledford, you're not part of District 5, but we appreciate you anyway. And my favorite, Councilman Gilbert. Appreciate y'all so much, okay? And thank you so much, Jerry. I appreciate you. Thank you. We look forward to working with you. And not only y'all two, but any of you here, okay? Thank you again. Thank you.